The night was darker than usual, like the sky itself was holding its breath. A cold wind whispered through the skeletal branches of the trees that lined the outskirts of the small town of Millbrook. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Sharp, urgent, impossible to ignore. Officer Jake Daniels tightened the collar of his jacket and glanced at his canine partner, Max, a powerful German shepherd whose amber eyes glowed faintly in the beam of the patrol car's headlights. Max's ears were pinned forward, body tense, nose twitching as he pulled at the leash. They had been called out for a routine sweep near the abandoned old bridge, a place kids sometimes dared each other to explore, but no one actually wanted to be after dark. Jake knew that routine in police work was a lie, just boredom and paperwork. Sometimes it was a gut feeling that something was very wrong. Tonight felt like the latter. Max suddenly stopped and growled low in his throat, muscles coiled like a spring ready to snap. His nose pointed at the base of the crumbling bridge. Jake squinted into the shadows. The concrete pillars were mottled with years of graffiti, and the dirt underneath was littered with leaves and trash. But Max was pulling hard now, his cold breath steaming in the chill air. Jake followed, crouching low as Max slipped under the bridge, vanishing into the darkness. The dog's silent signals were sharp, urgent. Something was there, hidden. A sudden rustle in the leaves made Jake's heart jump. Max's bark shattered the silence, echoing against the cold, empty water beneath the bridge. Jake knelt and peered into the gloom. His hand brushed against something soft and worn, a small backpack, soaked and dirt-streaked, hidden under a pile of broken wood and dead leaves. His breath caught. Jake carefully pulled the backpack free. The fabric sticking cold and heavy in his hands, he unzipped it slowly, half expecting nothing. Inside was ... nothing. No toys, no notes, no obvious signs of its owner, but the air around it was thick with a faint, heartbreaking scent of a child. "Max," Jake whispered, voice tight. The dog's ears perked as if he understood every word. Max nudged forward, nose low to the ground, tracking something Jake couldn't see yet. The urgency was real, and Jake felt it in his bones. A call crackled over the radio. "Unit 3, any update on your search near the old bridge?" Jake's voice was steady but serious. "Found a backpack under the bridge. Empty but strong scent of a child. Requesting backup and K9 unit support for an immediate search." The dispatcher's voice was clipped. "Copy that. Units en route." Jake glanced around the shadowed edges of the bridge. His town, usually so quiet, felt suddenly fragile. Missing children cases had been piling up, but no real leads, just heartbreak and unanswered questions. Tonight, maybe, that was about to change. Max led him away from the bridge, the dogs focused sharp as a laser. They followed a faint trail of scent, barely there but impossible for Max to lose. The path wound between rusted fences and dark warehouses, places that hid secrets nobody wanted uncovered. Jake's mind raced. What kind of monster could leave a kid here, in the cold, hidden like a secret beneath an old bridge? Who was brave, or desperate enough to hide in these shadows? They reached a chain-link fence with a loose gate, creaking softly as Max slipped through. Jake followed, pulling out his flashlight. The beam sliced through the darkness, revealing the grimy walls of an old warehouse. Windows broken and boarded up, the smell of oil and rust heavy in the air. Max pressed against the door, scratching lightly. Then barking, low and urgent, Jake's pulse quickened. This was no ordinary find. This was a lead, maybe the one they'd been waiting for. He tapped his radio. "All units, we have a possible location for the missing child. Stand by for further instructions." The night was far from over. At this point, if you're enjoying this story and want to follow the journey of Max and Officer Daniels as they unravel the mystery, don't forget to hit subscribe on the Brave Animals channel. We bring you real, powerful stories about animals who become heroes when it matters most. Jake moved closer, listening for any sign of movement inside the warehouse. A faint sound caught his attention, a soft whimper, almost inaudible. He motioned for Max to stay close. The team assembled quietly outside, officers ready with flashlights and radios in hand. They couldn't know what they'd find inside, but they had to be ready for anything. The warehouse door was heavy, groaning as it opened. The cold night air rushed in, carrying dust and forgotten memories. Max padded inside, ears pricked, and nose to the floor, Jake followed, heart pounding. The darkness swallowed them, but Max's presence was a steady reassurance. Suddenly, a faint noise echoed through the cavernous space, a tiny, desperate cry. Max growled, then bolted toward a corner where a loose floorboard caught his attention. Jake pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling down into blackness. "Back up," Jake whispered into the radio. "Found a hidden basement." The stairs creaked under his weight as he descended, Max close behind. The air grew colder, heavier with silence and secrets. At the bottom, the flashlight beam revealed a small, dimly lit room. Huddled against the far wall was a girl no older than 8 or 9, her eyes wide with fear but shining with relief as she spotted Max. Jake knelt down slowly, voice soft. "Hey there, you're safe now." She clutched a threadbare doll, trembling but unharmed. Max sat beside her, calm and protective. Outside, officers began securing the perimeter. The fight wasn't over. This was just the beginning. But tonight, a little girl had been found, and that meant hope was still alive in Millbrook. The dawn broke over Millbrook with a pale, uncertain light, casting long shadows across the town's quiet streets. Officer Jake Daniels sat in the cramped office of the local police station, exhaustion tugging at his bones but his mind racing with questions. Max, his ever-watchful K9 partner, lay quietly beside him, ears twitching at every sound. The girl they had found under the bridge was safe now, wrapped in a soft blanket and surrounded by officers and medics. But she wasn't ready to talk yet. The trauma was fresh, and her eyes still held a distant, haunted look. Jake knew this was just the beginning of a long road for her, for the town, and for the team trying to piece together the dark puzzle. Jake glanced out the window at the slow stir of the town, waking up, unaware of the nightmare that had been narrowly avoided the night before. Millbrook had always been a quiet place, the kind of town where everyone knew each other's name, and trouble seemed like a far-off story told on cold winter nights. But lately, shadows had been creeping in, whispers of missing kids, unexplained. Disappearances that sent ripples of fear through the community. Jake's phone buzzed. It was a message from the sheriff's department, confirming the arrival of additional units and the special task force that was now heading their way. A local millionaire philanthropist, Henry Caldwell, had stepped in to fund the efforts, a move that raised hopes but also stirred tension. Jake wasn't sure how the town's old guard felt about an outsider wielding so much influence, but if it helped save kids, he was all for it. Max shifted and nudged Jake's hand, as if reminding him that the dog's job wasn't done. The scent trail from the backpack had led them to the warehouse, but there was more to uncover. "All right, buddy," Jake murmured, standing up and grabbing his coat. "Let's see where this trail goes next." The morning was crisp, the sun still low as they drove toward the industrial district where the warehouse stood. The area was a patchwork of shuttered buildings and chain-link fences topped with barbed wire. It was the kind of place people avoided. After dark, a perfect hideout for those with something to hide. Jake parked near the warehouse and unclipped Max's leash. The dog moved immediately, nose to the ground, tail stiff with focus. They followed the faint scent deeper into the maze of rusted metal and broken concrete. Jake's radio crackled. "Daniels, we've got eyes on some suspicious activity down by the docks, possible vehicles moving around." "Could be related," he acknowledged and pressed on, Max leading the way, toward an old shipping container yard. The air smelled of salt and decay. Jake's gut tightened. They were closing in on something. But what? Suddenly, Max stopped and growled low. Jake froze. Following the dog's gaze to a small gap between two containers, there was a faint noise, soft, almost like a whisper. "Stay sharp," Jake whispered. He pulled out his flashlight and peered into the gap. For a moment, he saw nothing but shadows and rusted metal. Then, a thin hand slipped out, trembling. "Hey," Jake called softly but firmly. The hand retracted quickly. Max growled louder, stepping forward. From behind the container emerged a young woman, eyes wild with fear, clutching a ragged blanket. Around her, Jake raised a calming hand. "We're here to help." The woman looked around nervously, then nodded. She motioned toward a nearby building. Double quotes, "We, ... We were hiding," she stammered, voice barely above a whisper. "There are more." "Kids," Jake's heart pounded. This was the break they needed. He called in for backup, giving the location and describing the situation. As they waited, Jake sat beside the woman, offering water and quiet reassurance. Max stayed alert, ears perked and eyes scanning the surroundings. The woman introduced herself as Lily, one of the children who had been taken but managed to escape. Her story was fragmented but terrifying. She and others had been held captive by a ruthless trafficking ring operating out of several warehouses and abandoned properties around Millbrook. "We were moved around," Lily said, voice shaking, always scared. "They said if we made a sound, no one would find us." Jake's jaw tightened. As if sensing her pain and offering silent comfort, backup arrived, filling the air with the buzz of radios and the sharp commands of officers moving into position. The task force, coordinated by the sheriff and funded by Henry Caldwell's foundation, took over the operation with precision. Jake watched as the team spread out, sweeping through the buildings. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone knew the stakes. Suddenly, Max bolted toward a dark doorway, barking sharply. Jake hurried after him, shining his light into the blackness. Inside, they found a small group of children, huddled and frightened, but alive. Relief washed over Jake, tempered by the knowledge that the danger was far from over. The children were quickly taken to safety, medical teams assessing their conditions. Jake and Max stayed nearby, ready to continue the hunt. Later, Jake met Henry Caldwell in a quiet room at the station. Henry was a tall man with a calm demeanor and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "We're going to shut this down," Henry said firmly. "No more kids suffering in silence." Jake nodded. "We've got a strong lead now, thanks to Max and the team. But these people are dangerous. We need every resource we can get." Henry smiled. "That's why I'm here. We'll bring in everything: tech, manpower, legal. This ends now." As Jake left the meeting, his phone buzzed again. Another tip had come in, a clue pointing to a safe house where more victims might be held. He looked down at Max. "Fighting for these children, don't forget to subscribe to Brave Animals. We share stories of courage and hope brought by our four-legged heroes." The investigation pressed on. The quiet town of Millbrook no longer so peaceful. Every discovery opened new questions, and the web of trafficking stretched wider than anyone had imagined. Jake and Max became fixtures in the community, symbols of resilience and hope. But as the net tightened around the traffickers, the danger grew more intense. One night, a chilling message arrived, a warning that the kingpin behind the operation was watching, ready to strike back. Jake steeled himself. With Max by his side, he was ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead. The night wrapped Millbrook in a thick, suffocating blanket of darkness, broken only by the distant glow of streetlights and the intermittent flashes of police vehicles stationed around the warehouse district. Officer Jake Daniels stood at the edge of the perimeter, feeling the weight of the night settle onto his shoulders. Max, ever alert and steady, stood beside him, the sharp tap of his paws on concrete a grounding rhythm in the eerie silence inside the old warehouse. Shadows moved like whispers, the cold air thick with dust and secrets. The officers on the scene were tense but controlled, moving with precision. Guided by the scent trail Max had relentlessly pursued, the dog's nose had led them here, to this grimy shell of a building that smelled of rust, sweat, and fear. Jake had spent hours combing through every inch of the place, following Max's cues: a paw here, a bark there, a fixed stare toward the ground. And then, near the far wall, Max's behavior changed. He pawed at the floorboards, his growl low and urgent. Unlike the tentative signals before, Jake knelt down, his fingers brushing aside the dirt and debris that covered a slightly raised section of the floor. The boards seemed newer, less worn than the rest, as if hiding a secret beneath. Sheriff Jake called softly into his radio. "I think we found something." Within minutes, a team assembled around the spot, the older officers exchanging wary glances. Jake's gut told him this was it, the breakthrough they'd been waiting for. Carefully, the officers pried up the boards, revealing a narrow opening descending into darkness. The air that spilled out was colder, mustier, a sealed-off space. Forgotten by time, Jake switched on his flashlight and glanced down. The staircase was steep and uneven, the walls lined with cracked concrete and peeling paint. Max was already moving forward, tail stiff and nose twitching, guiding Jake down into the unknown. The beam of Jake's flashlight cut through the thick darkness as they reached the bottom. What lay before them was a small, dank room, its walls stained and the floor littered with broken chains and torn fabric. The faintest sound, a whimper, a breath, echoed in the silence. "Over here," Max barked softly, his eyes locked on a small vent near the floor. Jake crawled closer and peered. Through the metal grate, his heart pounding. Inside, a little girl sat curled against the far wall, eyes wide and searching. Her clothes were dirty and torn, but there was something fierce in her gaze, a spark of life that refused to be extinguished. "You're safe now." The girl's eyes flickered with cautious hope, and Max settled beside her, his presence calm and protective. Jake reached down, unlocking the vent and carefully lifting it open. He helped the girl out into the dimly lit room, wrapping a worn blanket around her shoulders. Jake asked softly. The girl hesitated, then whispered, "Emily." Jake smiled gently. "Emily, you're not alone anymore. We're here to help." Behind them, the officers began securing the entrance, preparing to bring the girl back to safety. But Jake's mind raced. This was more than just one child in a hidden basement. It was a sign of a network, a dark web of criminals who preyed on the innocent. He looked at Max, gratitude swelling in his chest. Without the dog's sharp senses and unwavering loyalty, they might never have found this place. Back upstairs, the sheriff and Henry Caldwell were already coordinating the next moves. The news of the rescue spread quickly through Millbrook, shaking the town awake from its fragile peace. Henry's voice was steady as he addressed the gathered officers. "This is just the start. We're dealing with organized criminals who think they can operate in the shadows. We'll need every resource, every ounce of determination to bring them down." Jake nodded, knowing the road ahead would be long and dangerous. But tonight, a little girl named Emily had been freed, and that was a victory worth fighting for. As the operation continued into the early hours, Jake found a quiet moment to sit with Emily. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now shimmered with tentative trust. She clutched a ragged doll, the only thing she had left from her past. Max lay nearby, ears twitching, ever watchful. "Can you tell me about where you were?" Jake asked gently. Emily's voice was barely audible. "They moved us a lot, different places, locked up. But this one was the worst." Jake's heart ached, but he kept his voice calm. "You're safe now. We're going to find the others and bring them home." The little girl nodded, a fragile smile breaking through. Meanwhile, the task force was uncovering more clues. Documents hidden in the warehouse revealed names, addresses, and phone numbers. Pieces of a sprawling network that stretched beyond Millbrook. Jake and Henry discussed the growing investigation late into the night. Henry's commitment was unwavering. His foundation, funneling resources into the fight against trafficking, will bring these people to justice, Henry vowed. For Emily and all the others, Jake agreed. But we need to move fast. They won't go down without a fight. The next days were a blur of activity. Searches expanded to other warehouses and abandoned properties. Max led the way, nose to the ground, chasing every faint scent. Each discovery brought more children to safety and more pieces of the puzzle to light. The community rallied, offering support and shelter to the rescued children. Local volunteers worked alongside law enforcement, building a network of care and hope. But the threat remained. The traffickers were desperate, ruthless, and dangerous. Rumors of retaliation reached Jake's ears, a warning that the kingpin was watching. Waiting. One evening, as Jake and Max patrolled near the docks, a shadowy figure slipped through the fog. Max growled low, muscles tensing. Jake's hand went to his holster. "Stay close, Max." The chase was on. The early morning sun barely touched the horizon as the law enforcement team prepared for the next phase of their operation. The warehouse district of Millbrook had become a fortress, with officers stationed at every corner and snipers perched high on rooftops, eyes scanning for any signs of movement. The air was thick with anticipation and fear. Everyone knew what was at stake. Officer Jake Daniels checked his gear one last time. Max, alert and poised, stood by his side, ready for whatever came next. The dog's steady presence was a reminder of the countless lives they had already saved, but also of the countless more still in danger. "All right, team," Jake addressed the group, his voice calm but firm. "We've got confirmation that several children are still being held inside. This is the moment we've been preparing for. We move fast, stay sharp, and bring everyone out safe." The command was met with a chorus of determined nods. Jake led the way, flashlight piercing the gloom. As they entered the warehouse once more, the stale air smelled of neglect, fear, and something darker, desperation. Max's nose twitched, guiding Jake toward the back where a reinforced steel door blocked their path. The handlers worked quickly, disabling locks and cutting through heavy chains. Inside, a narrow staircase spiraled down into a cellar. Descended cautiously, Jake's heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline sharpening his senses. Each step echoed in the confined space. At the bottom, they found a series of small rooms, cramped and dimly lit. The muffled sobs of children echoed. "Through the stone walls, here!" Max barked, tugging at Jake's pant leg. Jake followed Max's lead into a tiny room, where a group of children huddled together, some clutching ragged blankets, others holding hands tightly, as if that alone could keep them safe. One by one, the officers began ushering the children to safety, checking for injuries and offering water. Jake knelt beside a small boy, no older than 7, whose eyes were wide with terror. "Of here," Jake whispered. "You're safe now." Outside, the operation unfolded with military precision. Backup teams secured entrances, scanned for traps, and awaited the signal to move in on other suspected locations. Meanwhile, Jake remained by the children's side, offering what comfort he could. Among the rescued was Emily, the girl they had found in the hidden vent days before. She clung to the familiar presence of Max, finding strength in the dog's calm assurance. Medical teams arrived swiftly, assessing each child and providing care. The sheer scale of the rescue stunned everyone, dozens of children victims of a ruthless trafficking ring that had operated in plain sight. Jake's mind flashed back to the small, scared faces he had seen, the ones who had lost so much but still held on to hope as the last child was brought out. Jake exchanged a look with Henry Caldwell, who stood nearby, his face etched with determination and relief. "Started," Henry said quietly, "but tonight we've won a battle." Back at the police station, the rescued children were placed in safe care, their names and stories slowly unfolding. Interviews began, each revealing more about the horrors they had endured, the resilience that had carried them through. Jake spent hours with Emily, who was beginning to open up. Her voice was soft but clear as she described the dark rooms, the strangers, and the moments of kindness that had kept her alive. She said there were others. Jake told Henry more places, more children. Henry nodded grimly. "We need to find them. All of them." The investigation intensified, tracing leads and interrogating suspects. The network began to unravel, exposing a web of corruption and cruelty that reached far beyond Millbrook. Jake and Max were at the center of it, all searching warehouses, following faint trails, and standing as beacons of hope. But the traffickers were not going down quietly. One night, as Jake was reviewing evidence late at the station, his phone buzzed. A cryptic message appeared, a threat, warning him to back off. He showed the message to Henry and the sheriff. The room grew tense. "This isn't just about money or power anymore," Henry said. "They want to intimidate us." Jake clenched his fists. "We won't let fear stop us, not now." The next day, Jake and Max joined a coordinated raid on a suspected safe house outside town. The operation was risky. Intelligence suggested the traffickers had armed guards and were prepared to fight as they approached the dilapidated farmhouse. The tension was palpable. Jake's hand rested on Max's head, drawing strength from his partner's steady calm. They breached the door, storming inside with flashlights cutting through the thick dust and stale air. Suddenly, shots rang out. Chaos exploded. Jake dove to the floor, pulling Max with him. The dog growled fiercely, protective and unyielding. The team responded quickly, returning fire and securing the perimeter in the aftermath. They found more children hidden in secret compartments and locked rooms. Jake carried one little girl in his arms, her trembling body seeking comfort. Max stayed close, guarding their path out. Days later, as the dust settled, Jake sat on the porch of the police station, watching Max rest at his feet. The fight was far from over, but tonight there was peace. Henry approached quietly. Q. And Max did good. Jake nodded. It's not just us. The whole town's stepping up. We've got to keep that going. Henry smiled. With people like you and Max leading the way, there's hope. Jake looked down at Max, who lifted his head and gave a soft bark, eyes bright with loyalty. The road ahead would be long and hard, but together they would keep fighting. The hum of computers filled the command center at the Millbrook Police Department, the air thick with urgency and the relentless pressure of a case that had gripped the town. Officer Jake Daniels sat in front of a bank of monitors, eyes scanning documents, phone records, and surveillance footage. Max lay beside him, his sharp ears twitching at every sound, but his gaze steady, alert. The rescue operations had been just the beginning. Now came the painstaking work of unraveling the web of deceit and cruelty that had allowed a human trafficking ring to operate so brazenly in their community. Every lead mattered. Jake rubbed his tired eyes and leaned back. We've got several suspects, but they're lipped. The network's smarter than we thought. Lots of layers, moving pieces. Henry Caldwell, the wealthy philanthropist whose foundation had funded the anti-trafficking task force, stood beside Jake, hands folded, eyes sharp. We need to cut off their resources, follow the money, find the kingpin. Jake nodded. We're working on tracing financial records, offshore accounts, everything. But it's slow. These people are careful. The investigation was sprawling multiple locations, dozens of names. The traffickers had created an intricate system of safe houses, shell companies, and coded communication. They'd infiltrated parts of the town, buying silence and loyalty with threats and money. The community of Millbrook was watching, waiting for answers. Parents who once felt safe now locked their doors a little tighter, the shadows of fear creeping into daily life. The police department was under pressure, and Jake felt the weight of every missing child. But they weren't alone. Local volunteers had formed support groups for the rescued children and their families. Counselors, social workers, and doctors worked around the clock. The town's spirit, battered but unbroken, rallied around the cause. Max's role was vital. The German Shepherd was more than a partner. He was a symbol of hope, resilience, and justice. His nose had led them to countless breakthroughs, his presence a calming force amid chaos. One afternoon, Jake received a call. That changed everything. Daniels, we've got a lead on a shipment leaving the docks tonight. The voice on the other end said, possible movement of victims. Jake's heart raced. I'm on it. That night, Jake, Max, and a tactical team positioned themselves near the waterfront. The cold air sharp against their faces, shipping containers loomed like giants, silent and imposing. Jake's eyes scanned the darkness. Max sniffed the air, then locked onto a container being loaded onto a freighter. Move in, Jake ordered quietly. The team advanced, catching the criminals off guard. A brief, tense confrontation erupted, but the officers were prepared. The traffickers surrendered, and inside the container they found two frightened children, their eyes wide with disbelief and hope. Jake knelt beside them. You're safe now. The arrest sent shockwaves through Millbrook. Media swarmed the town's darkest secrets, spilling into the light. Back at headquarters, the arrested traffickers faced interrogation. Jake sat in on the sessions, piecing together fragments of information, names, locations, plans. One name kept surfacing. Marcus Klein, the elusive kingpin, believed to be orchestrating the entire operation. A man who stayed in the shadows, surrounded by violence and greed. Jake felt a cold determination settle in. Marcus Klein would pay for every life he'd shattered. Henry met with Jake later that week in his office, overlooking the city skyline. We need to strike hard and fast. This isn't just about Millbrook anymore. Klein's network stretches beyond state lines. Jake agreed. We're coordinating with federal agencies. It's a race against time. The investigation intensified. Surveillance grew, communications were monitored, and undercover officers infiltrated suspected groups. Every step brought new risks. Jake's nights became restless, haunted by faces of children yet to be found. Max, sensing his partner's tension, stayed closer than ever, a silent guardian. One evening, as Jake reviewed files, his phone buzzed. A new tip and address in a nearby county linked to Klein's operation. Jake and Max set out immediately, the weight of urgency pressing down. They arrived at a rundown farmhouse, the kind of place that blended into the landscape but held deadly secrets. Jake's team surrounded the property. Inside, they found a hidden basement where several children were kept. The rescue was swift, but 10's guards had weapons, and the traffickers were desperate. Max's bark pierced the silence, warning of approaching danger. Jake moved fast, pulling children to safety while officers neutralized threats. The children, though shaken, were alive. Medical teams arrived, their relief palpable. As dawn broke, Jake stood on the porch, watching the sun rise over the quiet fields. The fight was far from over, but today was a victory. Henry joined him. "You've done incredible work." Jake smiled tiredly. "It's not just me. It's everyone who's refused to turn away." The investigation continued, weaving through the dark underbelly of human cruelty and shining a light where there had only been darkness. For Jake and Max, every child saved was a step closer to justice. But they knew Marcus Klein was still out there watching, waiting. The final battle was coming. The chill in the air felt sharper that morning. But Officer Jake Daniels barely noticed. His focus was unwavering as he reviewed the final pieces of the investigation laid out before him like a map to the truth. After months of chasing leads, breaking down walls both literal and figurative, night was the night they would confront Marcus Klein, the man behind the darkness that had haunted Millbrook. Max sat quietly at Jake's feet, alert but calm, a steady reminder of the bond that had carried them through the toughest days. Jake's mind flickered back to every moment: the rescues, the whispered thanks from frightened children, the dark nights spent hunting shadows. Now it was time for justice. The operation was massive federal agents, state police, and the local task force, all moving as one. The target was a sprawling compound on the outskirts of a neighboring county, surrounded by high fences and security cameras. This was Klein's fortress, his last refuge. Jake checked his gear one last time and looked down at Max. "You ready, boy?" Max gave a soft bark, tail wagging slightly. Together, they joined the team advancing through the thick underbrush. The night was silent, but for the crunch of footsteps and whispered commands. As they reached the compound, lights flicked on, alarms blared, and chaos erupted. Gunfire echoed through the trees, but the officers pressed forward, trained and resolute. Jake moved swiftly with Max beside him, following the scent and sounds that led closer to Klein. Inside the main building, the tension was thick. Armed guards tried to block their path, but Jake and his team fought with determination born of months of heartbreak and hope. Finally, they reached the heart of the compound. Klein stood there calm, defiant, surrounded by evidence of his crimes. His eyes locked with Jake's, a silent challenge. "You won't get away with this," Klein spat. Jake didn't flinch. "Marcus, for every child you hurt, you'll pay." The arrest was swift. Klein was shackled and led away. The man who had cast a shadow over so many lives finally brought to light. Outside, the rescued children were safe, cared for by the community and professionals who had rallied. Behind them, families reunited, tears of relief and joy flowing freely. Jake watched as Emily, the little girl first found under the bridge, hugged her mother tightly. The journey had been long and painful, but here was healing. Max sat quietly nearby, his work done at least for now. Days later, in the quiet of the police station, Jake sat with Henry Caldwell, reflecting on the journey. "This wasn't just about catching one man," Jake said. "It was about shining a light on something people didn't want to see, about showing the world that we fight for the vulnerable." Henry nodded. "And we will keep fighting, because there are others out there who need us." Jake looked at Max, who gave a soft bark as if agreeing. Millbrook began to heal. The scars were deep, but the community's spirit was stronger. Awareness campaigns, support groups, and new legislation emerged, all sparked by the bravery of those who refused to turn away. Jake knew the fight against trafficking was ongoing, but tonight, justice had been served. Thank you for following this journey with us. Stories like Jake and Max's remind us of the power of courage, partnership, and hope in the face of darkness. Every rescue is a victory. Every life saved, a testament to resilience. What do you think communities can do to better protect their most vulnerable? How can we all be part of the fight against human trafficking? Share your thoughts below. You haven't already. Please subscribe to Brave Animals for more stories of real-life heroes making a difference. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, heroes come in all shapes and sizes, sometimes with 4 paws and a loyal heart.